This is the Garage Gym Athlete Podcast, and we're here to build autonomous athletes and put phenomenal programming into every garage, basement, and spare bedroom out there. I'm Jerred Moon, and I'm with Joe Courtney. We are strength and conditioning coaches who have turned over 20,000 people into garage gym athletes over the last decade. And we're here to reduce the information overload that exists in the health and fitness industry today. We're going to do that by covering relevant science and give actionable takeaways, not only from the data, but from our years of experience. So let's dive in. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Garage Gym Athlete Podcast. Jerred Moon here today with Dave Paczkowski. How's it going, man?
I'm doing good, Jerred. I'm excited to be here and excited to share some of the stuff that's been going on.
Yeah, I'm excited. So if listeners recall, I recorded an episode, it's been a few months ago now, and it was like, I don't remember the title, but it was basically how to prep for an 100-mile ultra marathon with no training, right? Something along those lines. And I was talking about how I did like a performance consult, and I didn't mention Dave's name at the time because I didn't want to throw him under the bus if he were to attempt to run 100 miles or get severely injured or sick or whatever. I've seen people get rhabdo in these races, all sorts of crazy stuff. So anyway, here's the guy, the man, the myth, the legend, who with very minimal prep ran 100 miles. And I mean, I'm taking basically all the credit for the preparation. No, I'm totally kidding. I gave very minimal guidance on what I could, not having run a 100-mile race myself. But Dave, welcome to the show, man, and let's dive into it a little bit more. Let's just start with your background, so everybody has a good sense of what you do for a living, and your training, what your training's like, all that kind of stuff, and family life. I think that's important because a single dude trying to do something like this is very different than where you're at. So let's dive into it. Yeah,
my lifestyle is probably a little different than David Goggins in terms of
right.
Family life and some of those priorities maybe, but I'm excited to have done it and connected with you. You were I know you mentioned maybe on the podcast, I think, but you were the one I reached out to even without having run an ultra marathon. I asked you if I was stupid enough to do it, and you said yes, you probably shouldn't do it, but I knew you'd be able to help me with not just getting it done. Like, I know there's a lot of people I could have reached out to that could have given me maybe a better step-by-step running plan or something, but that's wasn't really what I was looking for. So I'm glad we've been able to walk through this, and you deserve all the credit. We'll start with that. But I'm a doctor of PT by profession. Graduated coming on like 10 years ago. So that's been my main, I guess, educational and work background. I've always been in love with strength conditioning, though. It's I'm definitely more less on the clinical PT side of things, and more I'm like a strength coach stuck in a PT's world. So that's what I've always dove into personally, just with my training and helping other people out with performance and strength and higher level people than just necessarily recovering from a surgery or something like that. But my training has looked very little like endurance stuff, and very much I guess like power building would probably be the best way to describe it. Powerlifting focus, like lifting heavy, but kind of like a bodybuilding style with that. So interesting enough, I hadn't done anything more than a 5K leading up to this. And when I reached out to you in August, I was seeing if it was possible, and then kind of what that roadmap would even look like to survive it and finish it and not hurt myself or hurt all my my strength progress in the background, or in the on the path to doing that. So that's been my main focus. My family, though, we got 2 young kiddos at home. Our daughter just turned 2 this past August, and our son's 6 months Christmas Eve. So wow. We time's definitely not readily available. And my wife's amazing. She's at home with the kids right now. But my training, even over the last 18 months, I've intentionally cut back to doing no more than 3 hours a week is sort of what I capped it at of 3 days. That was my criteria of 3 days a week and for an hour or less each day. And it's been mostly strength focused. So I wanted to see if I could do something like this with that kind of background and almost zero running experience.
Yeah. And you did it, man. So tell me a little bit more about the 100 mile, because you had a huge audible, right? Like the race got canceled. There was
Mm.
like a huge audible there. And then we can dive into like super specifics. I have very detailed questions about the 100 miles, but what was your time overall, and what happened with the race?
Yeah, I finished. So I finished the race just under 27 hours, but I wasn't sure if I was even going to run it or what was going to happen because it was December 2nd, whatever that Saturday was. The Monday before that, I was signed up for the Brazos Bend 100, which is out in Houston. Trail race. It was supposed to be this 17-mile loop at a state park that you do 6 times, and they have their full setup there. And they sent an email out a few weeks ago of like, hey, weather's looking kind of sketch. And then the Monday before the race, they were like, hey, weather looks too bad. We don't want to compromise the state park, and we're making a decision to postpone it to January. And this was the Monday before, and I'm all of my training the last 3 months and nutrition and everything, then like to peak me for this weekend. And I was already tapering down. Nutrition was already like leading up to run it that weekend. So we found out what plan B was with that race getting canceled. I definitely didn't want to run for another 5 weeks, and we didn't even know if that weekend would work. So reached out to a friend of ours, Steve Weatherford, out in Texas, because he was set to run the race too, and he had a whole crew coming with him. So I was like, hey, dude, what's your plans for this? And he just said it's going down in Frisco, Texas. We figured we were heading to Houston anyways, so we detoured to Dallas and still ran it that weekend. It was 100 1-mile loops around Elevate Life Church there in Frisco, Texas, awesome. Which was not on a trail. It was all on pavement, which sucked for a lot of reasons. But I was ready to do it. I was mentally ready. I didn't want to train any longer. And I know a lot of friends that signed up with me end up they're like, oh, whatever, it's canceled. They backed out. But I'm like, I'm not, I didn't go this far just to say, oh, I tried my best and leave it at that. So we went and got it done. It was just under 27 hours there. And it was, I'm sure we'll get into a lot more of it, but it was fun. And yeah, I'm glad we just did that, but definitely not what I was expecting when I originally signed up for it.
Yeah, dude, no way I could train any amount of time and then not do it. Like if they cancel the race, I do exactly what you did. I don't care if I'm just running it in my neighborhood, for laps. I would have done the same exact thing. I think that's awesome. I followed along on Instagram when you're doing it. It looked like quite a production. I know Steve has like a good crew and like a community out there. But I mean, it looked like a legit like sanctioned race with how everything was set up. So that's really awesome that you had there. You had your pit crew, everything going in. So I was joking with you after the race because I'm running a third of the distance and training 3 times as long in months. And so I think that's one thing that has to be highlighted. Like why 100 miles with such little training? I mean, you did it, so like that's awesome, and congrats on phenomenal accomplishment. And there are very few people who ever say they're able to do something like that. But why not train for a year? Why not put in more time or something like why go at it with such little notice?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily drawn up that way, I guess, but so we had recently, I got a story behind that. We had recently revamped our family core values, and one of those was relationships. And we just moved to a new area. So we were out in California for the first 6 years of our marriage. We just moved out to, we're in Alabama now, and we have a whole bunch of relationships we're fostering. And we had just recently revamped our family core values. And probably within a couple of weeks of that was when my first buddy reached out, and he's like, hey, dude, would you ever think about doing a 100-mile race in December? And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. And then had someone else reach out, and they're like, hey, I'm doing this 100-mile race. And I'm like, oh, is the one that Steve's getting everyone for? They're like, yeah, want to come do with me? I'm like, no, still don't want to do it. So 100, it wasn't like 100-mile was ever even on my radar. It's not like this is a bucket list item or anything, but I was just on a walk one day and kind of thinking about it and praying about it. I'm like, and I'm like, I don't know. I just feel like I need to do, like, there's guys that I'm going to be able to train with these guys who are like doing this thing together. We're going to be able to go on these training runs. And what better way to, in my opinion, I think one of the coolest way to like build relationships is doing hard things together and stuff like that. So it wasn't something that was a bucket list item or something that I'd circled on the calendar, been like, oh, I just want to see how hard I am to be able to do this thing in 3 months. It's just, that's the race people picked, and they were they were coming at it from the same training background as I was, or even some of them less. So I'm like, hey, like, yeah, let's go for it and do it. And that was the whole reason for that timeline. It wasn't, I guess it wasn't anything that, was to see how much I can do in as little time, but that just happened to be the one that people were doing. And coincidentally, most didn't end up doing it. So the whole, it worked out in its own way. But that's kind of how that came about.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, I remember. So back in the day, I did an untrained marathon. People thought that was, but that was like legitimately untrained. That was like I decided like on a Monday. I was running it on a Saturday, so
Yeah.
like no prep. That was brutal. And so to do whatever more than 3 times that amount, 4 times really that amount is crazy. What'd you learn in the process of prepping? We talked a lot about heart rate training, fueling, that kind of stuff. So I want to dive into the training first before we get to the race. So you did have some training, right? It was roughly 3 months? Is that what you
Mm-hmm.
had? Yeah, 3 months of
Yeah,
training.
probably 3.5 months.
What'd you learn in that process? Trying to fit in what you could in that 3 month time period.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally different from what I was used to. I still, when we talked, I'm like, hey, I really want to keep my strength. Like my goal is not to do this and lose even backtrack 3 months. So I did everything I could to hang on to strength. So I kept those 3 strength workouts. I had to modify a little bit of the intensity, and I thought I was going to be able to maybe hold on to things a little better in some ways. Like I had to drop deadlifting pretty early on. Just I didn't realize how much on my low back and hamstrings it was. So, my deadlift was finally working its way back up, and then it was once my long run started, I just couldn't fit in during the week. So there was definitely exercise modification. I cut percentages down a little bit and maybe bumped the reps up a little bit to more hypertrophy range, like we had talked about. But running was just, in heart rate zone training wasn't anything I'd done before. My pace is like, my only cardio is like hard Murph or like hard 800 repeats is like cardio I know. And then lifting heavy, like those are the 2 things I know, like an EO3 5K as fast as I can, or
all power,
squat as heavy as I can. So when we talk zone 2 training, I'm looking at my heart, looking at the watch, and I'm like, man, this is so slow. Like how do people do this? So there was definitely a mental learning curve with that, of remembering that, okay, it's time on feet. Like I'm going in uncharted territories. Anything over my longest training run, I did work up to 30 miles, but anything over that, I had no idea what I was going to be getting myself into. So I think a lot of it was just a mental barrier of being able to go slow for a long time. And with family priorities and those things right now, it's like, okay, where do I fit this in? Because I don't want to go for a run at 8 a.m. on a Saturday and be like, hey babe, see you. Like I'll see you in 5 hours. And I didn't get to see the kids all week. So I was getting up at 3:30 to do a lot of my runs, and just, I only did 2 runs during the week, and then 1 long run on the weekend was my schedule pretty much throughout the whole thing. So I did on 3 weekly runs, and the two were short ones before work during the week, and then 1 long run. But kind of juggling all that and trying to see where everything fits time wise, because I don't, even over the last year and a half, or since our daughter's been born a couple of years ago, I haven't wanted to spend as much time training. So that was a readjustment back into, like you said, if I was single, it'd be no problem to find time for it, but fitting that all in with family, work, new area, current goals, everything was a lot of just like juggling and learning that new rhythm over the course of those 3 months at least.
Yeah, that's the worst part about endurance training is the time. Like I'm dealing with it right now. Like I have some, even like a 2-hour run, 3-hour run. Those are things that are scheduled as my long runs. And it's like, man, I got to do the same thing that you have. Cause like I have whatever, I'll have 5 games on a Saturday for my kids that we have to go to. So there's no like, I'll fit this in unless I want to do it at like 8 o'clock at night and run till late, or you just wake up really early before anything starts. So that's really difficult, but good on you for getting it done. But man, what's crazy is like how we set our expectations, right? You said your longest run was 30 miles, your longest training run. And I mean, how did you feel? Because you're not a runner. You're coming into this training with no running background, and you just like nonchalant hit a marathon on a random weekend. Like, how'd you feel on that training day?
That was definitely one of the most wild parts of it. And Lindsay, yeah, and Jerry, we've talked before about whether it's business or fitness or other things, how quickly we forget our wins on certain things
Right.
too, where you quickly forget that, I never run over 5 miles. And that was in high school. We did once a year, we did a 5 mile like football, which didn't make sense to me, but 5 miles for a football thing, we did once a year. But I'd run a 5K before, but never anything more than that. And then I'm hitting regularly 20 mile training runs and get up to the 30. And Lindsay's like, do you see what you're doing? Like, you never have run more than 5 miles and your body's like holding up really well and you're just hitting 20 miles. And how quickly we can forget those things with just wins in life in general, of like, oh yeah, even if this race didn't happen or I didn't finish it, which was never really on my radar. It's like there were plenty of wins along the way that definitely you have to stop and pause and reflect on a little bit, because that 30-mile run was one of those. I'm like, oh yeah, I ran my first marathon just on a Saturday. I got up and it was it was a lot of incline too, and it was trail. It took us a long time with there's quite a bit of elevation, but it's just cool to, like, even along the way, all those things that were the first of like, oh, my first half marathon, my first 20 miles, and you start getting up there, and then you're like, hey, I actually can kind of consider myself a runner now, even when I'd never, like, I hadn't done much of it. And when you look at me, I'm definitely not the natural runner build or anything that you might see at the front of a marathon, but it's crazy what you can do, how quick things can change when when you commit to a goal and you start training for it and just taking steps one after another. But then it can happen on the other end too. I got done running 2 weeks ago now, and I'm like, man, I can't picture running a mile right now. Like, that sounds terrible. And some of that's probably just not being fully recovered, but how quickly we can get out of that too. It's just when you get in the rhythm of it and get going, it's cool what your body and mind can accomplish with all that.
Well, that's just something to say about setting those high expectations. It's good and it's bad, right? We need to take stock of like what we've accomplished, but at the same time, if your goal had been a 5K in 3 months, which is a goal for plenty of people, that would be a big deal. I mean, typically people are trying to go a little bit faster, like whatever in a 5K, but still, you're set the goal so high, 100, that 30 probably didn't feel that crazy. Like, I'm reminded of this constantly just with my Garmin. Like, I'll do my long run and it'll be like, you hit a PR. I'm like, what kind of PR? What PR are you talking about? They're like, this is your longest run. I'm like, I guess it is. I've never ran that long before.
Mm-hmm.
And if it wasn't for the tech telling me, I'm the same way. I'm like, no, I have an ultra coming up in like a couple months. Like, that's my focus. How do I run that faster? Not do I have any wins right now? It's very hard to see that stuff in training.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how did your body hold up? So you're going from no runner, like not a runner, power building, to 30 miles is your long run, 3 days a week. And just so everyone listening knows, that's what I'm doing too. I 3 days a week. That's all I'm doing for running, because I don't want to put in 100-mile weeks or anything like that. I just don't have the time for it. But what was that like for your body? Would it hold up pretty well during the training, or start to fall apart?
Yeah, surprisingly well. I mean, as good as I would expect it to. I anticipated little things coming up. Honestly, my own stupidity probably got me into more trouble than anything during the training. When I stuck to that 3-day plan, it felt pretty good. I had a kind of like one-sided shin splints come up maybe in October, when I knew I had an event going on the following weekend. So I did back-to-back long days, which I hadn't done before. And I logged maybe like 20 miles on one day and 15 or something next. I'm like, oh, I'll just do both my long runs back-to-back days. And that flared some things up that lasted for, that eventually resolved itself. But a knee, I had some knee, like IT band type stuff on the right side come up closer to the race, and flared its head maybe a little bit on race day, but nothing that was like, debilitating by any means. I was really positively surprised how well things held up. And I think a lot of that's honestly a strength background. One thing I saw at the race is there was a lot of people that had you get running next to someone for a while and you're just kind of bopping and walking with, and they're like, hey, what's like, you done a lot of these? Like, no, you? They're like, oh yeah, no, I run like 50Ks and 100Ks. And they're like, some of these people are hurting pretty bad. And I felt like my body held up pretty good on race day too. And I think, especially on the asphalt, I think a lot of that's, years of squatting and lunging and deadlifts and a lot of single leg work and things. Like, I think my body was just able to better handle some of the forces than some of these people that had regularly run 50Ks and they were doing their first 100K or something there. because everyone was running different distances at the race. Some people were hurting a lot worse that had more of an endurance background, and I just attribute a lot of that to years of foundational training and strength training that allowed my body to hold up better. But definitely, when I pushed the mileage faster than I should, I felt some things maybe start to kind of flare up, but backing off, most things usually resolve pretty easily with just cutting it back a little bit.
It was the lunges, man. Let's be real.
Lunges,
All those lunges you
lunges.
did, man.
Miles and miles of them.
Yeah. So, but no, I agree. I think that strength training. I mean, I haven't ran into any real problems in my training volume right now, and I never really thought of why. But yeah, it's probably strength training. Because I know that has to be like shoved down runners' throats, right? Like, do your strength training, because they just don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like the opposite of that. We're like, we're good with the strength training. We're like, I don't really want to run, but
Yeah.
I think it helps us out long term, which
Well, I
is
think
huge.
Yeah, actual strength training too, and that's what I think a lot of runners, they're like, oh, I'm doing my strength work today, and they do like 2x10 body weight lunges and some band walks or something, and there's nothing wrong with that stuff.
Yeah, it's like
basically stretching. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's like
yeah.
Maybe a warm up for your lifting session. Yeah. So I think what they don't, where a lot of runners would probably benefit would be like, hey, actually like load a barbell, like learn how to squat and load a barbell up, like deadlift some, do some weighted lunges and actual strength work, not this like cross training band work and sideline clamshells and stuff. Not that there's not a time and a place for it, but I think there's definitely, people hear strength and all sorts of different things in the endurance world probably pop into people's heads. And I think actually like loading some things up more people would benefit from.
No, I've noticed that too. And it's interesting, both of our perspectives coming into non-runners starting to run more. And I was like looking at some run programs online and they'd be like, here's the strength. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? And even if it's not that, like, say you don't want to lift heavy, like maybe you just can't fit it in. I think volume's got to be there then. Like if you can't do the intensity, then you have to have the volume side, which I get could be dangerous with too much run volume as well. But I do think something like your body weight lunges, for instance, or like Murph level of 300 squats in a session, those kind of things with a vest, all of those things, I think you're getting to a point where you're strengthening beyond like, the warm-up sets, right? You're getting into something there. And I think if you can add that to your running, I think it really helps. I mean, I honestly feel like my body became more bulletproof like through strength training and like Murph workouts. It's like a combination of intensity and volume. And I think that goes a long way and definitely overlooked by most every runner that I've encountered so far.
Mm-hmm.
All right, man. Well, and I know heart rate training was kind of new to you and something we talked about implementing during the race. So if we move to like actual race day, I'd love to talk about what your strategy was, going into it, either if you were trying to stick to a heart rate strategy or run walk strategy or whatever. I think that'd be great for execution. And then I'd also love to talk fueling because I know that's
Mm-hmm.
probably a big one. So let's start with the actual execution strategy. How did you plan to execute, and what was your plan for pacing, and did you execute it well?
Yeah, that plan got changed. The plan I was working on maybe the whole time, anticipating a 17-mile loop's a lot different in terms of just even like fueling and aid stations and those things to a 1-mile loop. And there's disadvantages and advantages to that. The coolest thing by far was that I got to see my wife and kids 100 times over the course of 100 miles and run by them and see their, even just smiling and wait, like even just seeing them a little bit was something that I wouldn't have gotten at the other event. Lindsay got to run walk 10 of the laps with me, mostly pushing a double stroller, which she's amazing on that front. And so that was the coolest part. But so the strategy changed, and the challenging part was, okay, you see your wife and kids every loop, like there's going to be temptations to stop. So I had to up front be like, okay, I'm not stopping until every 6 miles was my, like, I'm actually can like stop and sit down for a minute and maybe get some food if I need to change or anything. So every 6 miles was like my longer stop with the plan to stop longer at 30 and 60 and 90 if I needed it, was sort of how that worked out with that course. Cause I didn't want to leave I don't want to leave a mental door open to be like, well, should I stop this loop or should I, because that would feed in too much to an easy way out if I'm just uncomfortable and I'm like, oh, I can stop and sit down. So I had to have some of those boundaries on there of like, okay, I'm not going to stop until the 6 mile mark, and babe, I won't see you to stop until 12 miles and then 18. So I was able to keep that the whole time. And I thought that worked out really good for me. I tried to keep heart rate as long as I can, but I think that, that goes, I don't say it goes out the window, but it was hard to maintain. The course kind of dictated a little bit of the each mile, because it definitely wasn't a hilly course by any means, but there was enough like steady low grade inclines throughout the mile course that I'm like, early on I figured out, I'm like, I'm just going to start walking these, like I'm going to walk these inclines and run the flats was just sort of how it worked out on a mile to mile basis. And that naturally kept my heart rate pretty well within those zones. I would take a little more rest when I needed it if heart rate was high, but towards parts of the race, it's like, okay, well, my heart rate's, as soon as I start to run, it's kind of creeping up. So either way, I'm just going to run this flat, get to the next corner, and then walk for the incline. So the course dictated that a little bit, but I thought the 6 mile strategy worked out really good. I would sit down and at least like sit down for a minute or 5-10 minutes and grab some actual food. And in between those 6 miles, I was doing kind of like carb drink, electrolyte powder, water, mostly some little like snackable things from a fueling standpoint. But I thought it worked out really good. A couple of the longer stops, it gets harder to get going after you sit for too long. But I thought it was good mentally just to have some of those breaks in there too.
So you change socks every 6 miles? Or
Maybe not every 6, but yeah, maybe every 12. I didn't have a set schedule necessarily on that. I kind of went off feel with a lot of that. I only had 2 pairs of shoes. So I wore the ones were actually feeling good for. I wore those for the first 60, and then changed my other ones for the last 40 of it, and then changed socks periodically throughout that.
And how did your feet hold up? I know there are a lot of horror stories of people losing toenails and stuff. How are your feet?
No toenails lost. A little bit of bruising in like around the toes and big toenails. My first shoes, the Brooks were probably a little too narrow. I thought they felt good, like supportive wise, which was good on the asphalt, but they did squish my toes a little bit. And then I had a pair of Ultras for the other ones, which was wider toe box, which felt good on the toes. But by the time I was 70, 80, 90 miles in, it was a little harder, like just foot stability and those things, being able to, it required a little more out of my feet to do the work, which was a little harder at that point in the game.
So where in the race did it get hard?
The funny thing, I don't say like, and this, I don't know if this rubbed people the wrong way, but honestly, like, and I had some reflection things. I wrote up a little article on like my 5 surprising initial takeaways from the thing. And one of them was like, running the race really wasn't like, it wasn't that hard. Like it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. And honestly, it's not hard compared to running a business, being a dad, being a good husband, like a lot of the things that we have to do. And that was one of the things, just as you're running, you get a lot of time to think. I'm like, this is a lot easier than a lot of things I'm going to do. Even the things that Lindsay had to do that day. Like I thought, I'm like, I'd rather be here running than having to take care of 2 kids and the two kids under 2 sleeping in a car and car camping, and her helping me and help another friend pick crew. Like those things seem harder to me than what I was doing. And there are definitely points where it kind of sucked a little bit. Like there was like stretches of kind of mini suck where it was like from maybe like 25 to 35. I was like, this just isn't fun right now, running the same loop over and over again. There was another stretch, maybe like somewhere late 60s to mid 70s, where it was another one of those stretches where I'm like, I don't really want to be doing this. But there was never a point where I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to finish this thing. Or it was just, I don't think overly methodical, but having the 1 mile loop, was very predictable in terms of like, okay, I know where I'm running to, I know where I'm walking to. Like we had talked before mentally, like, okay, one landmark at a time, 1 mile at a time. Like, okay, no, like I didn't get too caught up in how much I left, but that was the one thing that got me in trouble. Was mile 84 was the worst part of the race. That was, one of my longer stops, and it had to been, I was trying not to watch the time too much in terms of like what time of the night it was, but it's probably 2, 3, 4 a.m. somewhere in there. And I got 16 miles left, which seems so close on 100 miles, but that's like, I started doing math in my head, and that's where I got into trouble, where I'm like, okay, I'm down to, I'm running like 16, 17 minute miles at this point. So it's not like I'm cruising by any means. Off the first 50, I was probably on pace for like 24 hours or less. And the pace definitely slowed down in the last 50, partially being really tired, partially just, I don't know what to expect. And I don't want to zonk out at, mile 80 and not be able to finish this thing. So I was definitely conserving a little bit, but mile 84 was just, it dropped into the 30s and I'm freezing. It's the middle of the night. I'm tired. I'm cold. I'm hungry. I don't want to be doing it. And I started doing the math in my head, and that's when you think you're closer than you are. You're like, okay, 16 miles. And I'm like, oh, at this pace, that's like 5. So you start doing math and I'm like, that's more than I want to be doing now. But I stopped for a little bit. Lindsay had to help me. Like at that point, I can't even like change my own compression shorts and put on different leggings. So she's like helping me change. And that's has this whole humbling piece of it. But so getting back out there though, I sat for a while and I was like curled up in a sleeping bag. I'm like, I just need to start walking and just like take off on the next loop. Otherwise it's not going to get any easier. But that was a pretty rough stretch from even 84 up to like 96. You think being that close would be easy, but even within until I got to those last few miles that it was like, okay, I'm almost done with this thing and I'm ready to finish it.
That's incredible. Yeah. To be honest, if you would have asked me where I thought it would get hard, I would say 75 to 85. That would have been my guess, just because exactly what you said is like, it sounds like you're so close. It's like, he's 75 miles in. It's like, dude, he's got a marathon left. Like that's a marathon after running 75 miles. Like, gosh, that could take a toll mentally. So yeah, you really, really can't focus on how much is left. You can only focus on that 1 mile or like whatever that next thing is. I think that's really awesome, man. So let's jump back to fueling a little bit. You mentioned snackables and powders and electrolyte beverages, but did you ever feel like you bonked or ran out of energy, or did you feel like you stayed pretty on top of it?
I feel like I stay pretty on top of it. Yeah. I don't know if I feel too much. It's like in hindsight, I mean, I was pretty, I don't say conservative, but that gets back into, even the difference between our races is, you can say, oh, you said, maybe I'm training too much with taking 3 times the length, but we probably have different goals. I'm guessing you have some kind of timeline, some kind of time goal or something you want to hit with it. Mine was to finish, and the original race cap was 33 hours, and they kept that kind of the same for this race we were doing. So I'm like, I want to get under 30 is like my goal. Under 24 would be like, that's if I'm really crushing it and I think I can push it. But I figured out pretty, by the time I was 60 miles in, I'm like, I don't, it wasn't worth the cost to me to like, okay, maybe I hit 24 or maybe I don't finish this thing. So going into it, I was, the goal was to finish. And I think knowing what your win is in something like this is really important, because I had another friend who she had never run anything like this either. And she did it in like 19 hours and something. And I didn't see her sit down once, and she was just going. Granted, she's also probably like 115, 120 pounds, and she's got more of a runner's body, but I was very proactive about making sure I stopped and ate. And I felt like I kept energy pretty good. I tried, cause I tend to eat more. I don't like labeling, but like paleo-ish, like whole food type stuff. And you and I talked about it a little bit leading up to race, but I tried keeping that for at least the first part of it, because I just knew that felt good on my stomach usually. And certain foods could bother my stomach, and that's probably the biggest thing that I was worried going in the race. That would be a reason I wouldn't finish, would be like if my gut totally totally went out on me. So I tried keeping it clean early on, but I went to PB&J's pretty earlier. Like potato chips worked really good. They actually had one of the guys there, he has a coconut company, and they had like maybe 300, 400, 500 like whole coconuts that they were just cutting open and putting a straw in and like handed to you. Nice. So I had unlimited coconut water, which was a little unexpected perk of the race. But I try to listen to my body a little bit on it. Like if I felt I needed salty, I went salty. If I felt I needed sweet, we had PB&J, like Nutella. I'm trying to think what other sweet stuff. I had like some dates and honey, and those were things. But like probably staples were like PB&Js and potato chips in terms of whole foods. And then I didn't do a ton of like bars or anything, but kind of just whatever. I just trusted whatever felt and sounded good at the time. I haven't drank a soda in probably like 10, 15 years, but like I saved it for like that 2-3 a.m. mark. I opened a Dr. Pepper and like took a couple sips of like sugar, caffeine, dopamine hit that I had to look forward to. So I didn't have super strict guidelines going into it, but that's sort of how I went about it. I felt it worked pretty good for me.
And no stomach issues?
no stomach issues,
That's awesome. And did
which
you
is good.
experiment with most of that stuff in your training, or was there anything new that you added um, on race day?
I'd done some PB&J. I hadn't done, I mean, I didn't do any soda or anything like that. Most of the other stuff I'd done or something close to. I didn't specifically do potato chips, but I've had potato chips enough to know, like, I felt it would be fine. I'm trying to think if there's anything else out there that I didn't use a lot of, but most stuff I kept pretty close to. I didn't do a huge variety of stuff. I tried keeping it. I mean, I'm fine eating the same things in general. So PB&Js, it wasn't like I was getting, I definitely don't want a PB&J anytime soon, but during the race, I knew it was predictable energy that,
Yeah.
that worked well for me.
No, dude, that's solid. I love PB&J. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't eat as many as I should. If you should eat any
Yeah.
amount of PB&Js, they're
At a race like this, you should eat
yeah.
a lot of them.
I'll definitely put. I know that would be easy on my stomach right there. Well, cool, man. Let's jump into recovery. Unless there's anything else from the race you think we should cover.
No, I think that's pretty good on race day stuff. Yeah. If I think of anything, I'll circle back on it, but we can jump into recovery.
Yeah. So, what was recovery like? You just and to note, you went from running a race to hopping in a car and driving whatever 12 hours back to Alabama. So, probably not the best. Probably maybe set you back an extra day or two. But what
Yeah.
was recovery like coming from this?
Hmm. Yeah. Some of the things that you end up just naturally having to do isn't the doctor recommendations that would necessarily prescribe, but you don't realize, or I didn't realize. I mean, it makes sense in hindsight, but I didn't realize how much of a come down effect there would be, and how fight or flight on you are during a race like this. Because it's not, if I'm definitely, I was more nervous. I'm more nervous getting ready for like a Murph or an EO3 5K that we're doing or something where it's like, I know I'm gonna have to hit this. It's gonna be hard. It's gonna hurt. And you got to come out of the gate fast. With this, it's like, the first mile everyone runs together and you run a 10, 12-minute mile. And then that's mostly the pace for the first however many. So it's like a different, nervous system stress and a thing where I was never at the point where I had to like get into that discomfort that you would think of with like, okay, I'm trying to hit a Murph PR or something. That's like a different level of hurt that you don't necessarily get. But I didn't realize how much, even when I was sitting down to relax every 6 miles, how much there was like, okay, I need to get out there and I got another 6 now before I'm back in this spot. And you're always kind of thinking about the next thing. Okay, what do I need to do to prep my body? What do I need to do fuel wise? What do I need to have ready? So I didn't realize. And then as soon as the race was done, I went and sat down in the same spot I'd been sitting at, and my body just like, you just like, let's go. And like I was nodding off in the chair there, and like I didn't realize the extent that would have. And Lindsay drove home, and I passed out in the car. We didn't have a far drive, but I was just like out cold, and I went back, and took me, my second ultra marathon was getting in and out of the shower and putting my shorts on was like ultra marathon number 2 of how long that took after the actual race. But I went and slept for several hours at least, then got up and pretty much whatever food we had around, and sounded good. Lindsay had gotten some breakfast burritos, so it's like just getting calories in. But I felt like my back was the most surprising thing that was really sore. My knees were achy, my feet were obviously sore, but all those miles on pavement, just my back was pretty achy. And that was the thing for the next 2 days, that like the getting out of the car, like old man, like having to brace myself on, like pull yourself up. If any of you guys have had back injuries or your back give out or anything, it's not a fun feeling, but that was, like hard time picking my daughter up or something like that was maybe the biggest like surprising thing that I had from a recovery standpoint. But that lasted 2 days or so. And then it was just general knees ache. My feet were sore. But the other thing I underestimate is I didn't realize like the low level inflammation that I probably still feel. I finished the race when we're recording this probably about 2 weeks ago, 15 days ago or so. And I didn't realize how much that would still be going on. Like I just kind of feel off and sore, and like I'm not recovering as quick when I'm not doing anything heavy in the gym even yet. But it's still just taking me longer to feel like my muscles are fresh and recovered. I still don't feel like I'm there yet.
Yeah, no, I've experienced that just with like bike races that I've done. You just kind of know when your squat's not right. Like when you load the bar and you're like, this is just
Mm-hmm.
not. And it can take a while till you're feeling like, okay, I got my power back, my speed back, my strength back. And I feel like that can take a while. And it's like exactly what you're saying. It's just like inflammation your body's not accustomed to. Um, so scale of 1 to 10, how jacked up was your body after the race?
For like 2 days, probably like 8. Then that dropped by after 2 days. I was probably probably cut in half. And then if it wasn't for my back, that's why that was the most surprising thing. I thought my knees and hips, like I thought my feet and ankles would be totally messed up, and it really didn't feel like the case. Like I was able to take some walks and those things. My back was what really had me moving slow, like where you can't, like turning in bed feels like a max effort of just like bridging up to scoot and those things. So that was definitely far more sore and I would say painful, but that was the biggest limiter. If it wasn't for that, I'd probably be like 3, 4 out of 10 in
And
terms of like, gently move around.
was that low back? Low back that was hurting?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, that could, dude, all on concrete.
Yeah.
Oh, that's brutal.
I know, because I noticed that I didn't notice it the whole race, and I noticed it at it was maybe like around mile 90. There was so church was actually getting in for session it was Sunday. The race was finishing, so they have a 9 a.m. service, which I was hoping to finish by, but we didn't. I got done around maybe like just before 10. But there's people coming in, and some of the people are coming and supporting, because a lot of people know Steve and a lot of the guys running it out there. And one of the guys came up and he saw me. I was just kind of run walking by myself, and he came up and like, he's like, "Hey, how you doing?" And like put his arm around me, and I like twisted a little bit, and I felt this like twinge, and it wasn't him that caused it, but just like that was the first time I was aware of. I'm like, oh yeah, that's something that I know has probably been there for a while, but I hadn't done any twisting or a lot of bending to really know that it was flared up. So that was I did notice it a little bit at that moment and kind of those last 10 miles, but that was yeah, that was the most surprising thing, but not that surprising with however many steps on concrete.
Yeah, man. When I did the untrained marathon, I'll never forget. I can't remember the mile. It was like in the 20s, I think, and I was running with one other guy, and I was like, oh, we were hurting pretty bad, like our knees and everything, and we were like, let's run backwards for a little bit. Like, let's just maybe that'll help. And I'll never forget the pain as I just was running and making that twist, just all of it, like
Mm-hmm.
ankles, knees, back, everything. And then I started running backwards, and that's also like when it clicked. I'm like, oh wow, you're gonna be messed up after this. Like that is those are some serious pains. But it's funny
Mm-hmm.
how, and that's the thing with running in a straight line. I mean, to be honest, I kind of hate it. It's not the best. But I think that's a good segue too, because I caught your email. If anybody's interested, Dave has a pretty good newsletter you guys should sign up for. But ultimately, I loved your takeaways. You had a lot of good takeaways about like just running and all this other stuff. I'd love to kind of finish out with those things, because I'm seeing a lot of similarities in what you're saying. Like I've talked about this on the podcast recently. I'm putting in all this run time, right? So I have no time for any other kind of conditioning if I want to keep doing my strength training. And so what I found is I just don't feel as athletic. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know how else to describe it to anyone else if you haven't been like more of a power based athlete. Because I think my like super heavy lifting days are behind me. I've just got one too many serious injuries now. I'm always going to lift, but I'm not going for any significant like a 600-pound deadlift, anything like that. Those days are kind of gone. But coming from that background, I just feel so unathletic. Like I don't know how else to describe it other than that. Like I just like when I play
Mm-hmm.
sports with my kids, I'm like, yeah, like I just things kind of hurt in weird ways. I don't see running being a long-term thing for me. Like I'm going to do this one. Who knows? Maybe I do another one. I do enjoy the conditioning aspect, some of the mental aspect, but I'm not in love with how it's making me feel as an athlete right now. And I saw some of that
Mm-hmm.
in your takeaways, and I was like, okay, this is awesome. So I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, man. Like, what'd you learn from becoming a runner for a short period of time?
Yeah, very short period. And everyone's like, "Oh, you can do another one?" I'm like, no. I'm like, well, I won't say never, because this wasn't on my radar either, and I signed up for it in 3 months. So I'm definitely not ruling out that I would do something, but I totally agree, man. I think I feel far less athletic. I think overall, and I say this kind of with an asterisk, like I think overall I feel less healthy in general. And I say that like I didn't do any blood work before and after. I didn't track my resting heart rate. Like there weren't a lot of things maybe cardiovascular that I was tracking, but I feel like overall my mobility is definitely down. My joints hurt more. My gut, with all the food I had to consume through training, adding in essentially doing what I was already doing, but adding in an extra by the end of it 40 something mile weeks. Like that was hard on my gut, just like taking in that much food. And if anyone's tried to really like bulk before, they know it's hard to do that, especially when I'm used to intermittent fasting and not eating much during the day. That's something we specifically talked about is like, you're like, hey, you can't do that right now. That's a lot of stress on your body and you need the calories. So I think gut health was down overall. I actually had some bad gut pain on my 30-mile run. I didn't mention this, but I had like actual gut pain that like kind of brought me down in a catcher squat, like healed me over. And I'm like, and that's why I was concerned about finishing the race. And I reached out to a buddy who's a naturopathic doc, and he got me in a couple things that at least got me through the race, like supplement wise and those things. So thankful for that. But gut health was down. My body composition, I didn't have the capacity to track a lot of things that maybe I would have in a different season, but body composition was a net negative in terms of about the same weight. I maybe leaned up a little bit, but I definitely lost muscle mass too. So I don't think I look as good as I did before I started running, where you think people are like, oh, you're adding all this running in, you're going to like get super shredded. And I was concerned enough about underfueling that I made sure I was eating enough to fuel. So overall, my strength numbers were down. My power felt less. My athleticism feels less. Bending down to pick something off the floor feels harder. Like there's just like basic, getting on off the floor with my kids. Like there's just basic things that I don't feel as healthy with. So I think one of the takeaways is that amount of mileage at least isn't, in my opinion, the best for long-term health or the things that I'm trying to do either. If it's a net negative on my health in terms of at least the things that are most important to me of like energy, like mobility and general well-being, body composition, strength. Like if those things are all down and I'm spending an extra 10 hours a week training,
Right.
that sounds like a pretty lousy trade-off, like that's, if you have a specific goal to do this and there's a clear reason of why you want to do it, go for it. If there's like, a mental thing you need to get through, like push through or something that you feel like you need to, but in terms of doing it for health, I definitely don't, it wouldn't be something I'd recommend to people to, go train for an ultra or something like that. I think there's lots of better ways to do that in a much more efficient way as well.
Yeah, I think the sweet spot, if you're just trying to hit some of the check marks that you were talking about, like, hey, I want good body composition, I want to be strong, but I also want to run. And this is just through my own experience, nothing from like scientific data or anything. But I just feel like it's probably like 15 to 20 miles a week. Like I think that's about the threshold, because when I was doing that before I signed up for the ultra, that was about all I was doing. I was doing 3 runs a week. I was actually feeling pretty good. I was like, oh, I think I look a little bit better. Like those run distances were only about 5-6 miles each time. Like it wasn't that bad, and I felt okay during that. It's when you get like these longer runs, like anything above 10 miles for me, I typically, like right now I drive to do these runs. I was just doing them from my house, but like some of the roads around here are sketchy, no sideway, like no sidewalk or anywhere where like you get ran over pretty easy. So I go somewhere else to run. And when I come back, I always feel like what you're saying. I feel like an old man getting out of my truck. And I'm like, there's no way this could be good for me long term. Like, right? Like, there's no way like you feel like this getting out of your truck. And I'm not trying to take a crap on runners. Like I'm running right now. I just think that you got to know what you want, right? You got to know what your goals are and whether or not it fits. Because if you want to get shredded and really lean up and you want running, that's probably sprinting that's going to do that for you. Like adding some sprints in there, because we all know sprints, that's going to tax the central nervous system. You're going to get some boost in hormones, everything else. Those kind of things are good. Maybe occasional like zone 2 work or whatever. Like I see the benefits in that. But these long distances, I think most people, it's kind of like powerlifting, in my opinion. Like I'm talking about like professional powerlifters, and because I give them a hard time too. Like in no way is back squatting 1,000 pounds going to end up good for you. Like, you see all these popular, famous, if you want to call them that, power lifters getting hip replacements at the age of 40 and things like that. And so it's every sport, and it's every sport when taken to an extreme, probably not good for the body, right? And so I think that's probably what you and I are both realizing and trying to find that balance. Have you seen that in strength too? Have you ever overdone it with strength to where you're like, man, I don't know if am I going too far in the strength
Mhm.
world like you did in the running world? Have you ever seen that on the strength side?
Yeah, maybe less in the strength side. Just and maybe that's just because I have more experience reps under my like. I think maybe I'm even subconsciously more aware when I'm getting to that point of. And I guess I didn't have that with running, and I had a set timeline of I couldn't. I had some flexibility, but I couldn't just be like, oh, I'm going to take 2 weeks off of running because my
Right.
ankle hurts. I'm like, I don't have 2 weeks to take off. Where I think naturally with strength stuff, the with knowledge and experience and background, if I feel like I'm getting to that point, I could be like, well, I'm not going to back squat for 2 weeks, and I'm going to do some other squat variations or lunge, unilateral movements. Like there's enough tools I have in my back pocket to be able to modify some of that. I think would probably be the biggest difference, which has kept me pretty healthy from a strength standpoint. But I do think I've gotten into some of that when I've really pushed the heavy numbers, um, more feelings of like maybe not specific lower back injury, but like lower back, like this, if I bend wrong, this could like, if I pick up my kid wrong, like this could end badly of like, not throw my back out, but, having some of that increased pain and limited range of motion, all that. So I think that's probably the closest thing I've gotten strength wise, but I've pushed numbers pretty heavy, but I've never done like competitive powerlifting either. I absolutely think if I, was doing that and changing my stance and different things to like absolutely move max load, that'd be different. But I've definitely pushed strength numbers, but without the goal of like, how much can my body absolutely push. I think there's always been kind of some guardrails on that because I haven't, my ego hasn't overtaken me that much to like absolutely see where my breaking point is on something like that.
Yeah, and since you're not going to meet, you don't have to. There's no reason. Like you'd be like, well, is 500 good enough, or is 520 really necessary? Like that you can
Mm-hmm.
make those decisions. And I think that's probably maybe the ultimate takeaway, no matter what you're training for, is know your limitations and know when to scale back if you want to stay healthy. Because that's my goal, right? Like I just want to, same as you, I want to be in top shape for running my business, taking care of my family, playing with my kids, but then like still well above average. Like that's still a
Mm-hmm.
goal of mine. Like I don't ever want to relax so much to where I'm like if walking is my fitness and I'm not like severely like sick or injured or something like that, then I'm doing something wrong. I still like to train hard and do those things. Um, now for
You need a pair of what are the New Balance? I forget the brand of the shoe though, but the ones that like the people that get total knees love, like the New Balance Ultra Supportive
Oh yeah,
walking shoes. Send
exactly.
you some of those.
And that's like my kids, they wear Crocs all the time now. It's like, it just drives me crazy. Like if I'm
Mm-hmm.
ever doing fitness that I can wear Crocs in, you just take me
It's not
out.
right.
That's it. Like
Mm-hmm.
let's end it. Um, but all right, man. There are probably two types of people listening to this episode right now. Uh, well, one, there's the garage gym athletes who listen to podcasts and find this story interesting and what it's like to not train, because that's the most fascinating part of this story, is that you had very little time to train and you're not a runner, right? That's why, like, I could interview a million different people who ran a 100-mile race, but I don't really care to. I really want to
Mm-hmm.
hear your story about what you did, because I think that that's really freaking cool, just having done some of that kind of stuff, but not on that level myself. But then there are going to be the people who just found this through search. They're going to be like, yeah, I'm thinking about doing a 100-mile race. I don't really want to train. I don't want to train for a year or whatever. Maybe I'll do 3 months. So I'm going to do Dave's way. So what would your advice to those people out there be? Should they do it? Should they not do it? Like, did you get enough out of it that you think it's worth it? Like, what are your thoughts if someone's thinking about doing this themselves?
I'll circle back. Yeah, I think you need to have a very strong reason of why you're doing it. And I don't even know if I had a strong enough reason. In hindsight, it's like it was a cool accomplishment in that, but it didn't change anything about me. I feel it's a cool accomplishment and getting the text from people and the the things and hearing people's response to it, it's cool. But I've done there's been a lot of, internal work over the past probably 5+ years that like where previously I would have done it for those reasons of like, oh, I need to like really see what I'm capable of. And I want people to like notice and think I did this cool thing and tell me how awesome. And like, one of the surprising takeaways was like, those things landed kind of empty on me. And some of that's, I'm trying to do a better job, like receiving those things and actually not just like discounting them. Cause I've also gone through that of like, oh no, it was nothing. It was definitely something, but, yeah, I think really know why you're doing it, whether you're doing it in 3 months or, 30 months, like know why you're doing it. Cause I don't think, we talked about from a health standpoint, I don't feel better because of it. I think, there's a lot of things that go into that. And I found that during the race, I thought I was going to have this, like, I thought there's going to be this, like, oh, I can't go on any further. And like, God's going to have to speak to me and like,
Right.
and all these like big movie type moments going to happen. And it wasn't, I don't want to say it was underwhelming, but it was kind of like I finished and I'm like, cool. Like not in a cocky way. Like I knew I was going to, I never had a doubt of that. I wasn't going to finish this thing, which can lead to a little bit of underwhelm with it too. And I think that the slippery slope is that, okay, where do you go from there? It's like the underwhelming part. If you're not in a really good spot overall and mentally, and you're like, it's like, okay, that can be depressing if you're like, okay, I finished this thing and I thought that would solve X or make me feel this way, and that didn't happen. And I think the other side of that is, oh, I did 100 miles, so what's next? One of my buddies that was there had just run the Moab 240.
Mm.
It's like then you go down that route of like, oh, I need to do like the next hard thing, or you get into, I honestly don't listen to a lot of David Goggins stuff, and I don't care for him, not because of what he says. Like I don't
Not your cup of
I don't
tea.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, not for me. And like you can get into that mentality though of like I just need to like go harder and push myself more. So just know why you're doing it. I think would be a big thing if you choose to do it in 3 months. It's it's a cool story and fun to talk about just because I get to connect with you and chat with you and share it with people. But it definitely didn't have that effect that I thought maybe it would have. And I didn't go in necessarily looking for that. But you think maybe something like that would leave you feeling really accomplished. But especially when a lot of my buddies dropped out for it, I was kind of bummed because the main reason I wanted to do it was I wanted to do it with a lot of them, and a lot of them didn't end up doing it for a lot of them good reasons and stuff. But that was kind of the bummer part is like I wasn't looking to do this. I just wanted to do something cool with a lot of people I love doing life with. So that'd be the first thing on it. If you're thinking of doing it in 3 months, reflecting on it, I say I went from zero training running a 5K to 100 miles, but when I really reflect on it, I don't realize all the things I've done over the last 20 years to put myself
Right.
in a position to do that. So from the physical side, I think really, knowing, having a smart outlook, where if you aren't really aware of your body and you haven't been training for the last 10, 15, 20 years in whatever way that is, I would reach out to help for someone that someone that can tell you if you're in a spot to do that or not, because I've put my body through enough, I don't say similar tests. It's definitely a unique test to run 100 miles, but I put my body through enough tests to know how it's going to hold up and to know when if I really hit the point of like, that's just not right. And I'm going to hurt myself if I do this. So that'd be the biggest concern if someone's thinking about doing it in 3 months is make sure you have the right foundation and the right base. And like we talked about, I think a lot of that comes from a solid strength base gives me more margin and flexibility to go do something like this. But that'd be probably the biggest like concern, yellow flag, like caution of like, make sure you have the right base going into this. Don't just do 3 months of not doing anything and jump into something like this. Probably wouldn't be my recommendation.
What's funny is I had to. So when I ran the untrained marathon, I had to go back and edit that article. So I published that as an article on the blog, and I didn't realize how much search traffic it was going to get for people who were legitimately trying to do an untrained marathon. And so we're talking about from couch to marathon, and they were like using my article as a guide. And I had to go back and edit because I was just getting emails and all these questions and comments of like, okay, like I don't work out, never really have, shooting for a marathon this weekend. What are your thoughts? I'm like, don't do it. So like I had to edit like the bottom of the article, like just so you know, like
Mm-hmm.
I've been training at that time probably like 15 years. I've been training 15 years. I can run a mile like sub 6 every single time. just so you understand where my fitness level was at, my base, like you're
Mhm.
saying, to be able to do something. And I think that's true of you too. This isn't from couch to 100 mile. This is from barbell
Mhm.
to 100 mile, which is
Yep.
is important to note because it's like, yeah, Dave has a huge training background. It just wasn't a running background. So it's a different level of difficulty. So I would say if anyone's listening to this thinking, yeah, I don't do anything for fitness. Dave is no slouch. I've trained with him a few times. Like you know what you're doing. You know what you're doing in the gym. You have a
Mhm.
significant background in strength and everything else. So definitely, I wouldn't recommend anybody go completely untrained. But if you have a solid base, it's worth a shot. But man, it sounds like you because I just love the story, like how the picture is being painted because you hear the opposite of everything you're saying when you hear about people running 100 miles is like they have this gigantic why. You were like, nah, I don't know, I'll do it. And then it's like there's this revelatory moment, right? Like in the race, and you're like, I wanted it, but I didn't get it, you
Mhm.
know. And you're not addicted to it now. You're like, I'm done. I'm good, because that's all you ever hear when anybody else does it. Is they're like, yeah, I ran this one race, and now I'm hooked. I'm doing like 3 ultras a year and like all this stuff, or changed my life. And because I know for a fact, like I'll run the ultra in April. I could run 100 miles again later that year, whatever. I just feel like I know myself so well. I'm going to have a very similar response to you. That's just my thought. Like maybe something happens to where I get in a really low point and I do have this like revelatory moment, but I don't know if it's being a father to 3 young kids or my training background or military background or whatever. Like I'm not going to, I know it's not going to happen. Like I'm going to do it and I'm
Mhm.
going to be like, all right, cool. Like that's over. So I'm just glad that there's someone else out there. And I do think that you have a really strong control of your ego though. It sounds like there's no doing this for the wrong reasons. You know what I mean? Like you want to do it
Mhm.
with like you said, people you love and doing life with. And I think that's really strong and also says a lot about you and your character. You don't define yourself around these things. And I think that's probably what you and I have in common is like we can do some cool stuff, but we don't define ourselves from it. And I think that's why we don't get as much out of it as other people
Mhm.
would or do. That's just my opinion, my 2 cents, as someone who I think will respond very similar when I do ultras in the future. Um,
Mhm.
but man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You got anything to say on that?
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think we do have a lot of similarities in that way, and I think we just get different. People get different things from it, and it's like the thing. It's not the things I got from it were not the things I thought it would. And it's just like it just revealed to me more. I was journaling about it. It's like, and I told Lindsay about this. I'm like, the thing I didn't need to get any. Like I realized I didn't need to get anything from the race, and like the race just ended up bringing more of what was already out inside of me. Where I was running, I was just like I was having fun, and I was just like at peace and in the moment and just going. And I didn't have music on really or anything. I wasn't, hanging with a lot of people, but I just think it was a cool experience in a different way. It just wasn't, it wasn't this like big thing. It was just like, oh, that was another fun thing to do
Yeah,
on the weekend. Let's go home and,
but
go home and enjoy time with
the most fun you never want to have again, right?
never again.
Yeah.
Probably. Asterisk.
All right, man. Well, I did mention you got your newsletter. You're doing a bunch of cool things. I've seen online, and everything else. If people are interested, like where should they go? Check out your stuff, learn more about you, all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Instagram's the best place. I actually took a full year off Instagram, and I'm back. I'm back on it as of a couple months now. But Dr. Dave Pack, DrDavePac. Follow me on Instagram. Yeah, shoot me a message if there's any questions you have or want to chat at all. If you guys need any help with strength programming, that type of thing, I'd be happy to give you my 2 cents on it. So that's best place to find me though, and you can find pretty much anywhere else. I'll be on that platform right now.
Awesome. Well, Dave, it's been great to catch up with you, man, and get it all recorded. I had a lot of. Hopefully, the listeners got something out of it. I was just more curious about the actual process because, so I asked questions super selfish to me, and so I'm hoping that other people wanted to know the same things that I wanted to know. But I just think it's such a cool accomplishment, and I think it's awesome that you did it, man. So I really appreciate your time and for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Jerred. No, I had fun with it. I figured this pretty much would have been a phone call we would have had anyways, so we
Right.
might as well record it and share it out there. Hopefully people got some good from it. But yep, shoot me a message if you guys need anything. And Jerred, thanks for having me on, man. Always a fun time.
Yeah, man.